I'll call the meeting of the Board of Directors for June to order. We've already had the roll call. Are there any deletions or corrections to the posted agenda?
Forget about David.
I'm sorry. Oh, okay. We also had closed session, so could our legal counsel report out closed session?
Yes, thank you. There were 5 items heard in closed session. The first one, the SCORE cultural survey, safety survey, there was no reportable action. With respect to item 2, regarding the claim by Anita Cabrera against the Tahoe Forest Hospital District related to alleged medical malpractice, that claim was rejected on a vote of 4-0. Hearing under Health and Safety Code 32155, Home Health Hospice Annual Report, that report was received and filed on a 4-0 vote. The closed session minutes were both approved, also on a 4-0 vote, and the medical staff credentialing were also approved on a 4-0 vote.
Thank you for that report. And going back to the deletions and corrections to the posted agenda, I want to let everybody know that 13.1 is canceled for today. And are there any other changes or corrections in the agenda? Okay. If not, then we'll move on to our consent calendar, and these are reports and, oh, sorry.
Audience input.
Oh, I'm sorry, I jumped to my other sheet. So we'll have audience input on anything that is not on our current agenda. If you'd like to speak, you've got 3 minutes to do so. If you'll come to our microphone, give us your name for the records, and then again, you have the 3 minutes to address the board. Because it's not agendized, we won't have the opportunity to discuss it, but we will take it under consideration. So, do I have anybody in our audience that would like to give input? Okay, seeing nobody moving forward, we'll go to our next item, which is input from our Employees Association. And do I have someone to give input?
Don't turn it up too loud. Don't start my timer yet, Alice. Okay? I messed it up last time. I don't want to have that happen. Okay. Hello, my name is Julie Morgan. Many of you know me as I've been here for a minute, but for those of you who don't, I work in the emergency department. I'm a nurse. I've been here a little over 16 years. I've been the president of the EAP for the last year and a half. And so I just want to start by saying thank you to the board and to everyone who has taken the time to attend this meeting, donating your time, energy, and ideas to help ensure we remain the best mountain health system in the nation. Also, I'd like to a huge shout out to the EA and the EAP board. Sheila's our president for the EA, with their tireless dedication to everything that's been going on in the district in the last couple of years. And lastly, to Alex McClennan and Lauren Caprio, who over the course of the last year and a half of my term as president have never let me down. Lauren is always available, always listens, always strives to help. I genuinely believe Alex and Lauren value our insight and ideas. Thank you to both of them. Okay. As president of the union, I often find myself in a unique position with a unique perspective, able to see both the employees' concerns and points of view, as well as the concerns and the pressures of management. With the recent changes in leadership in the district, many of our patient-facing, boots-on-the-ground employees have expressed apprehension, nervousness about the future. These employees come to work every day. They believe in the values of our hospital. They have families to support, elderly parents to care for, long commutes, often with horrible traffic and poor weather. And they show up, they believe they belong. While the weight of the district might be on you, the board, it might be on you, Louie, the CEO, it might be on C-suite. The foundation remains the everyday employee. We greet the patients. We care for the buildings. We make the food. We paint the walls. We change the light bulbs. And we provide amazing medical care. We are the people. We are the foundation upon which all of this greatness is built. We trust our leadership to guide us in the right direction And we now face an amazing opportunity to solidify us as a true team, management, leadership, employees, district, community. As we move forward, we, the employees, would simply ask for a vote, a forum for our concerns, our ideas, our thoughts to be heard, to truly be a team. I believe the sin is doing less than we are capable of, and together, we're capable of anything. So let's go do it. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Julie.
3 minutes, Alice.
Do you want to hold on to the last 20 seconds?
I make sure.
Thank you for doing that. Do we have any other input from our audience? The EAP, excuse me. Okay, hearing none, then we'll move on to item 12, and that's our consent calendar. And these are generally reports, non-controversial documents like policies that have been reviewed by a variety of committees. But we always have an opportunity for the board to pull any of the items on the calendar. Do we have anybody that wants to pull anything? Okay, so I'll go to our audience, our staff. Does our staff have anything they want to pull? No. Does our audience have anything to say about any of the items on the calendar? Okay, if not, can I have a vote to approve the consent calendar as presented?
I'll move to approve the consent calendar as stated.
A second, please?
I'll second.
Okay, so it's been moved by Director Barnett, second by Director McGarry, to approve the consent calendar as presented. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The consent calendar has been approved as presented. We'll move on to 13, which are items for board discussion. We'll go to 13.2, the greenhouse gas emission report, and this is by our company that we contracted with, Mazzetti, and I think it's Austin Berlin that's going to be presenting with Dylan Crosby and
Just make a quick comment on this report prior to moving it over to Dylan here. Of course, we want to welcome Austin Berlin with Mazzetti. He is going to go through a greenhouse gas inventory report. I do want to just make a quick comment here. This is the power of the public comment process. So we clearly had a lot of interested community members on where the hospital was in terms of how we stack up against other hospitals and potentially plans for the future. So I think tonight what we're going to see is a report that really is brought on by that public comment process. So I appreciate everyone involved in that. And I want to thank the staff as well for all of their involvement in this report. And I'll pass it over to Dylan.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, just quick introduction for Austin. Austin's with Mazzetti, and Ted and I just had the pleasure of going to the Clean Med Conference about a month ago, and I'll just say very confident we chose the right partner, because I think about maybe a few, but Mazzetti was a presenter on pretty much every subject line that we were in there. So very trusted in this partner. They've been a great partner to have through this entire process, and a ton of work from a ton of staff members to get all this data put together. And with that, Austin, I'll pass it on to you.
All right. Thank you all for having me here today. Just going to share this slide deck. There we go. So here to just give you a recap of the greenhouse gas baseline that we did for Tahoe Forest Health System. It was great getting to work with Dylan and Lewis and Martina and others in this effort, and really looking forward to the future and what this information brings to your organization and how it's going to help your community. So we focus specifically on Tahoe Forest Hospital. This is the only building we did the inventory for, so eventually looking at expanding that, but for now we're focused on the 25-bed critical access hospital that's serving the communities throughout the greater North Lake Tahoe area. The goals of this inventory are really to help you understand what your operations and what your hospital, how it's impacting your emissions and what the footprint is. So really, we wanted to set a baseline year, and that baseline year was calendar year 22. So 2022, we chose as a baseline year. The data for that year was readily available, and that was a big factor. We did consider 2023 as a possibility, but in addition to data not being fully available yet, it was also an abnormal year weather-wise, with one of the highest snowfall amounts in recent history that year. So we decided that 2022 was the right year to choose for the baseline. And that's going to include scopes 1, 2, and 3 emissions, and I'll define those in a moment here. And so you may be asking, what is a greenhouse gas inventory? So it's really the process of cataloging the greenhouse gas emissions every year, quantifying the amount of emissions that each one of the different categories, so all aspects of your organization, and the different results, the different impacts that those activities have. And so the most common greenhouse gases that we're looking at are carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and a bunch of fluorinated gases. So we follow the corporate accounting and reporting standard known as the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, and you can find that standard at ghgprotocol.org. That is a widely used protocol. It's the most commonly used and trusted standard. So a little bit about what Scope 1, 2, and 3 mean. Scope 1 are direct emissions that come from burning fossil fuels or combusting fossil fuels on site. So we look at things like on-site natural gas as the most common one, but that also includes fleet vehicle fuel, generator fuel, refrigerants, and even medical gases and anesthetics. Scope 2 are indirect emissions as a result of purchased energy. So most commonly purchased electricity, and that's the only Scope 2 emission source that you have at Tahoe Forest, but it could also include purchased chilled water or district steam as other healthcare organizations or other building owners have. And Scope 3 is really everything else. These are indirect emissions as a result of a business's the value chain. So supply chain, all the purchases that you make as an organization, your waste, employee commute, patient travel, business travel, are all included in Scope 3. So now we're going to share what your emissions look like. So this is a dashboard that was included in the baseline report, and this is a high-level summary of your emissions. As you can see, Scope 3 is by far the largest chunk of emissions, and that is to be expected, especially in a healthcare organization. Capital goods and purchased goods and services are by far the largest chunk. I think what else we can see from this is that natural gas is a big contributor, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But I can talk about each category briefly and share how the data was collected. For natural gas and electricity, obviously we use utility bills, and we look at the amount of energy you're consuming on a monthly basis and for that year. Fleet vehicles, we have mileage reports, and we can calculate based on the type of vehicle and the miles traveled that year. Generator fuel, there's also utility bills. Medical gases, we can look at the number of bottles purchased and the different sizes of those bottles and calculate the emissions that way. And refrigerants, for any piece of equipment that uses a refrigerant, it is assumed that some bit of that refrigerant leaks over time. And so for every time that piece of equipment is recharged with more refrigerant, it's assumed that amount of recharge has been leaked. In 2022, we didn't have any recharges, so we assumed there were no leakages, but that could change in the future. Scope 3 is a little bit of a different process. So Scope 1 and 2, we focus on actual data. We have real bills. We have real activity data. For Scope 3, capital goods and purchased goods and services, we aren't really tracking the emissions per item purchased. But what we do have is a general ledger report, and we use a spend-based method. And so the EPA has a resource called the Environmentally Extended Input-Output Model. And this is a model of thousands of lines of spend-based factors that look at different categories and assign a emissions per dollar spent. So we're looking at dollars spent for a lot of these categories, and so that covers capital goods and purchase goods and services. Fuel and energy related activities, that's all the upstream emissions, but those are directly correlated to the amount of energy you consume. Wastewater, we have water bills, and so we're able to, and water meter data, so we're able to track that. Solid waste, we have a waste data report for different types of waste, so we're able to calculate that based on a weight of the different types of solid waste. Business expenses or business travel and expenses, we have an expense report. So we look at that on a spend-based method. And employee commuting, we sent out an employee survey. So if you're an employee of Tahoe Forest, you may remember a survey that was sent out a few months ago. And so that was the information that we collected and calculated our emissions there. Patient transport, we made assumptions based on number of visits and patient and the zip codes. And third-party aircraft is light flight or other helicopter use. I don't think there were any of that use in 2022, but you would use the fuel use or mileage or number of trips. And use of sold products, and we're looking at inhalers and things like that, so we can count the number of sold products. So you can see scope 1 and 2 are typically broken out from scope 3 just because it's so different. But if you want to look at everything pulled together, we can really see a holistic view here. And so you can see where the biggest contributors are, which are capital goods and purchase goods and services in scope 3, as well as natural gas. And natural gas, I think, is one of the biggest opportunities for this organization in terms of addressing emissions, because scope 1 and 2 are really where an organization has the most influence and the most impact to make changes immediately. Scope 3 is really, you're at the mercy of your suppliers, and it's a little bit, you may have some influence, but the actual direct change may take a little bit longer, and it may be more of a implementing policy or putting pressure on your suppliers, which will be a slower transition. So I'll go back one slide. Looking at this, we have a total of 7,146 metric tons of CO2 equivalent. That may sound like a large number. It may sound like a small number. It's really hard to tell when you're looking at this for the first time without putting it in perspective. And so what we also did was a benchmarking exercise, and we looked at a number of different sources of benchmarking data so that we can help put this into perspective. Now, when we're looking at greenhouse gas emissions, what we did this last few months was create a baseline year. And going forward, we can make improvements to our operations to reduce those emissions, but we're going to be comparing that back to our baseline. So we're really always going to be comparing ourselves to ourselves yesterday. But looking at this benchmarking gives you a perspective of where you are in similar facilities, and I think that is helpful as well, just to have a sense of where you stand. So we used a couple normalization factors. Your building area is just over 142,000 square feet, 25 staff beds, 33,000 adjusted patient days, 4 operating suites, and so on. And we also made the assumption or showed that you're in the climate zone 6B, which is cold and dry. And that is something to be noteworthy of when we talk about energy being in such an extreme climate. So we looked at these different sources. Practice Green Health conducts an annual survey and produces an annual sustainability benchmarking report. And this report is really the premier analysis of sustainability performance data in the healthcare sector. So it has data from over 11 different impact areas, including energy, emissions, water, waste, and a bunch of others. And so we took this data set as really one of the key comparative factors. This benchmarking report is a result of a voluntary submittal of healthcare data from over 370 hospitals across the country, and it uses data from the entire cohort. It also breaks it down into different groups, and so we looked at the small hospital cohort as the one that would be most closely aligned with your facility. They didn't have a critical access list. I don't think they had as many to come up with that cohort, but we looked at the small hospital. Their definition for small hospital is fewer than 200 staff beds. So you're obviously much fewer than 200 staff beds, but it was a number to go off of and compare with. We also looked at the American Society of Healthcare Engineering, ASHE. They have an energy benchmark, and that's over almost 1,000 hospitals across the country. This looks at mostly energy, but we were able to fine-tune that down to a range that was plus or minus 50% of your square footage. So really close in terms of size, and this was 99 beds or less. We were also able to identify hospitals that are in cold climates. An Energy Star Portfolio Manager is also energy data. They have a data explorer tool that has a ton of different ways you can slice and dice the data. So we were able to look at hospitals under 200,000 square feet, so right in your size criteria, as well as look at hospitals in climate zone 6B. So we felt that these were accurate representations of benchmarks that you could be compared to. And then lastly, Mazzetti has a database of anonymized client data that we averaged of all of our clients, and we use that based on the various sizes, and we have a few critical access hospitals as well, and so we're able to compare that. So looking at the energy benchmark, I think the biggest thing that sticks out here is this EUI, and so the chart on the left, if you're not familiar with EUI, it's energy use intensity, and this is really the energy use per square foot of your building. This is the primary number that in the industry is you can compare your facility in terms of energy efficiency, how much energy you use per square foot based on or compared to similar hospitals. And so for the year 2022, that bar in the middle, you're at a 278, and those three resources I mentioned are listed there in the orange, green, and blue. So you can see you're slightly above. I'd say probably about 30% above or so, about 30 points above, I mean. And then looking at your historical energy consumption, one thing that I don't know if I could, laser pointer there. Let me see this. So one thing that sticks out here is in the summer, you use almost twice as much natural gas as electricity. So even in the summer, you have a high natural gas consumption as well as in the winter, which is expected. And so this just shows that I think there is opportunity, but that is one of the things that stood out there. And so I think that's something that would be key, a key opportunity moving forward. Looking into the Practice Green Health and Energy Star data, we have these energy benchmarks. You could see, if you're looking at it per OR or per on-site FTE, per adjusted patient day, you use a little less energy. Per patient bed, you use a little bit more. Per square foot is what we were just looking at, a little bit more. Just different ways. I think it's maybe more telling of the nature of your facility. You're in a extreme climate. You're still a critical access facility with 25 beds, but you're very active and you have a lot of activity going on. So just a way to put this in perspective a little bit. Moving on to the carbon benchmark. So we can look at emissions. There isn't really a good source of information of benchmarks for entire scope 1, 2, 3 emissions. And so that it really depends on if a healthcare organization has done a greenhouse gas inventory and if they're willing to share that data, which is not very many. And so what we're able to do is look at energy-related emissions. And so this goes back to some of the energy resources we had and calculating emissions there. And so these graphs, we show a Practice Green Health percentile graph here, as well as Energy Star portfolio manager using a U.S. average emissions factor, and then we can also look at California specific. And so this is an average of the California grid electricity. And so what this says is you're really around the 50% to 75 percentile, meaning you are 50% to 75%, sorry, meaning you're higher than 50% to 75% of other similar hospitals in terms of energy-related emissions. The other graph up here just shows scope 1 and 2 emissions. That includes the other scope 1 items, but it is similar in that in the results. And then, of course, scope 3, this is looking at the facilities that Mazzetti has in our anonymized client data. And so you're kind of in the 10 percentile range there. Looking at water, water data, I think this probably has more, it's probably less accurate to look at the water data in this sense, just because of where you're located and the state of water use and kind of the more so the locale than really your operations. But if you're looking at it on a per square foot basis, you have 66% more water use per bed. You can see the numbers there. I will note that some of the water meter data was lost in early 2022, so we had to kind of shift the amount of shift the time frame in which we collected the data, but we did still compare 12 months of data. And onto the waste benchmark, I would say this is probably the least accurate. Mainly, I think the benchmarks have a lot of assumptions, and there's so many unknowns. The different types of waste that are collected, it kind of all just gets rolled up into total waste and recycling only. And so but there are dozens of waste categories that could be tracked. And so I think that is one of the recommendations moving forward is looking at ways to improve waste data collection so that you can really focus in on where the biggest opportunities for reduction are. And the more you know about how much waste is going to, how much hazardous waste you have, and cardboard and recycling and food waste and cooking oil and all these different categories, then you can focus on creating policies and programs to address those bigger chunks. So lastly, only going to wrap up here in a couple minutes. Want to just share some recommendations that we have from these from this inventory and what this information will really mean to your organization. I think the biggest thing here is we want to socialize this information with the staff, with your clinicians, with other key stakeholders, your community, and ensure that they understand why this is important to the organization and also how they can contribute. You know, this is kind of a moment and an opportunity to get everyone involved, because everyone does have a role to play in this. And so I think that's something that can come out of this as a next step, is gathering and holding some workshops or things like that you can really pull the community and other stakeholders together to find ways to make these recommendations. As I mentioned, energy consumption, capital goods and emissions, capital goods and purchasing are some of the big opportunities. So for energy consumption, we noticed that there's a high amount of natural gas being used, almost twice as much as electricity, even in the summer. And so there's some of the energy opportunities, looking at ways to improve your ventilation in your building controls, heat recovery. These things, more so than not, have an opportunity to be implemented in probably all facilities. And so those are some of the things I think could be next steps to address moving forward. I'll just share this. This is an average hospital energy baseline, and that giant chunk of red there is natural gas reheat, which is a result of excess ventilation rates. And so that's the first thing that I look at. I'm an energy auditor. I work in hospitals across the country, helping them address their energy efficiency needs. And so that's the first thing I look at is the amount of ventilation and reheat, because that is really the largest chunk in an average hospital. capital goods, which is really buildings, machinery, all the equipment, all the capital projects, or all the capital items that you purchase, long-term assets. I think a life cycle assessment could really identify the big opportunities and help you create improvements in that category. Purchase goods and services. This is the biggest that I've seen throughout all of our clients. But a sustainable procurement policy can go a long way. And so this really puts pressure on the suppliers to take a look at what equipment and what products they're supplying and help them improve their sustainability practices, because ultimately that's what's going to move the needle in this category. As well as data collection. I think the more information that you're able to collect in this category for yourself will really go a long way to making improvements in the future. And then lastly, we sent out an employee survey, which was filled out by, I think it was about half of the company. I think encouraging more participation in this, and then possibly promoting alternative transportation methods or providing other incentives just could be some ideas that we've seen worked for other organizations. And so I know that you're not in a major city that has a lot of different transportation methods, so this may not be as easy as saying just take public transit, but I think it just opens up a conversation for ideas. I know that was a lot of information. Happy to answer some questions, but just want to thank Dylan and Lewis and Martina and all of you for allowing me to take some of your time here and share a little bit of these results.
Well, that was a lot of information to absorb. Do you have any questions at this time from the board in regards to greenhouse gas emissions and how we might be able to work with some of the recommendations?
Yeah, I have a question. So we have a winter climate that's pretty severe. And I was interested that your comment was that we might be able to do better gas savings in the summer rather than the winter. Can you, first of all, make sure I've got that right, and secondly, comment on that?
Yeah, I think I know what you're asking. So I was pointing out that there was a big opportunity, that it shows that there's a big opportunity because of the amount of gas use in the summer. That doesn't mean to say that there's not opportunity to reduce in the winter. I think that there's opportunity to reduce across year round. But just showing that is the lowest that your gas goes shows that there's still an excess of gas being used, and that I haven't set foot in your facility, but I'm willing to bet that there's an opportunity for ventilation reduction, and that is usually one of the key factors in terms of natural gas consumption.
Can you explain what you mean by ventilation reduction?
Yeah, so commonly we find that some facilities have constant volume, or at least in some areas that are not occupied 24/7, the fans are running 24/7, and the spaces are being ventilated 24/7. And even if they are occupied but at a lower demand, they're still being fed supplied the amount of ventilation, the amount of air, as if it was the hottest day of the year and you had a conference or a bunch of people in the space. And so these are things that we can look at to optimize the amount of ventilation being supplied to each room, to each zone, and look at the hours of occupation, operation of the space and the demand of the space. So how much ventilation that space needs at that time. And we can reduce the ventilation within code requirements, so we're not going below code. But it's something that we find is a huge opportunity across many, many hospitals across the country.
Thank you.
Anything else from our board? Anything from our audience?
I have a question, might be more internal. Is this something we plan to do yearly, every couple of years, or what? Or was this just to get a baseline and see what we see? Or
Yeah, I mean, the goal of this was a baseline, but I think it would be responsible of us to potentially look at this maybe biannually. And so maybe every other year we take a look at this. Obviously, we need time to, take recommendations, maybe implement something and see how that works over that next measurement year. So I think it would be appropriate maybe every other year.
Thank you.
Anything from our audience? Yes. You want to step up to the microphone, please?
Hi, I just wanted to say thank you so much for doing this, for commissioning this study, and for taking the first step towards responsible stewardship of our local contribution to mitigating climate change. On my daughter's behalf, who came here last time I came, was a little shorter last time, couldn't make it tonight, but she's thrilled, I'm thrilled. I'm really excited to see what steps you all take based on this information. So that wasn't exactly a question to Mr. Mazzari, but still just wanted to say thank you.
Do you want to just give your name for the record, please?
Sorry, my name's Jana Bloomquist.
Thank you. Any other comment? Well, just to dovetail onto that, do you want to thank Austin? And if there's no other questions, we can let him go, or do you want him?
No, I think we're good. Thanks, Austin. We appreciate you being here.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your time.
And then we'll have Dylan and Ted Owens went to Clean Med, which also talked about reducing waste, greenhouse gas emissions, et cetera. And so it'll dovetail in on that. And besides that, the board was sent a link to an article by the American Hospital Association that went through a lot of what he had just gone through. So take it away, guys.
I'll let you launch.
Yeah, well, first, thank you for the opportunity to send us to Clean Med. Ton of exposure. It's great to see what other organizations are doing, what they've accomplished, what have been failures, and how we can learn from those failures. So really in this presentation, we just kind of want to explain some of the things we were exposed to, maybe share some of the partnerships that were out there. Again, very Mazzetti was all over that conference and about 75% of all those. So really confident in the professional services and the assistance we got in that baseline for that comfort. And Ted, you want to give them some
Yeah, I'll
background?
just add, just to give you a little bit of a background on Clean Med. Clean Med was founded in 2001, so they've been around a long time, and they are considered to be the renowned conference on clean med, climate, and changes of sustainability. I think we had over 800 attendees from across the nation. I was very surprised that there is a lot to learn. And, you walk away with some positives, and then you walk away with a much better understanding of challenges. And I think we'll talk a little bit about that. With that, let's rock and roll.
Am I controlling this?
You are.
Perfect. So just kind of a framework and kind of some of the hierarchy things that we learned there. I think the big one is really just the analytics and understanding where we're at. The report we've received from Mazzetti is a great baseline, but even how you heard from Austin is there's still a ton of analytical opportunities just to really understand where we're at and where that impact could be made, right? And that comes into waste, that comes into specific materials within the hospital. There's more detailed research that we can do. And I think as we look at all of these items, really setting that baseline, tracking our targets, as well as making those impacts and reporting those out is going to be big in the future. The conference in itself had a pretty wide theme of reduce, reuse, rethink. So I'm going to try to duplicate that theme as we do some of the introductions into the topics as we jump in there. And this is straight from our Mazzetti report. And I just want to repeat kind of those top 6 I'll call them opportunities that we have there is really those capital goods, natural gas, our fuel and energy, purchase goods, patient transport, and staff transport. So kind of under the framework of reduction, again, I think how you track is going to be a big part of this process. Exposed to many different things. One was plastics. How can we support, or how can we remove single-use plastics? How can we consolidate the plastic utilization? Obviously, in the healthcare industry, we have a tremendous amount of packaging, single-use type items, a real challenge, but also a ton of opportunities in there. I'm going to skip medical supplies because I think Ted has a good story for you here. On our waste side too, again, really trying to understand where our big proponents of waste. We've looked at different recycling programs. Our dietary department has made tremendous improvements throughout the last couple of years. Still opportunities really throughout the health system on how we can get there. Travel's a big one, always assessing different travel needs. And, we always think about staff getting to the hospital or patients getting to the hospital. But, one interesting, I believe it was Ohio State actually used drones. The technology's improving pretty well to reduce and remove most of their courier service. So they're using drones to do pharmaceutical deliveries throughout their campus, as well as lab deliveries and urinalysis deliveries, which, how scalable is that for us here, and how reliable is that for us in our climate? I don't know, but it just shows some of the increased, efficiencies, technology, and kind of the innovation that's going out there. So
It's much easier in a flat environment
yeah,
than the one that we have.
for sure.
We should try it, though. That sounds fun.
Yeah, so we've been looking at it a little bit. We'll see how that goes, and then maybe Ted, I'll let you do the medical supplies.
Next slide. Do it there or here? On reuse.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah, why don't we go to the next slide? I'm going to just jump down to medical supplies. This was a very interesting session where an ER physician did a little demonstration, photographic demonstration, on use of a suture kit with a laceration on a head. And so, you reach for a suture kit, you open that suture kit, and then she showed you the contents. And the only two devices or tools that she used in that kit was a suture pusher and a scissor. All the rest, the majority of which was plastic, is thrown away because it's prohibited by regulation to, restack, reuse, and what have you. And I did have a conversation with Chair Wong about this. I know that there was, I think you represented that there was an effort at one time to try to see if we could do something different internally, and it was a challenge. It lacked efficiency and perhaps cost. But I think the thinking that is moving forward today, from what we saw, is a real high level of attention on reuse with kits and the way that we package things and that we use certain materials within the hospital, because there's a great deal of unnecessary waste in the name of other efficiencies and cost. I think that in her example, this particular physician, just making these changes and where you reuse materials would reduce their waste in that I think that she was Ohio State also by 58%, just in that one category, which was a CO2 emission of 38 to 50%. And so I think we'll be very interested in the future in working with Mazzetti in future benchmarking, in taking a look at those types of materials that we use in the hospital, and not just in the clinical environment. You can apply this to dietary and other departments at reduction of materials that we can find other ways to reuse or to utilize internally. So it's not just medical supplies, but I thought that was a very, very powerful presentation that we saw there.
Yeah.
Go to thermal storage.
Yeah, so obviously with, recycling and reuse, I think obviously in waste products, food, there's the opportunity. But probably the biggest bang, especially with how we just saw, is natural gas is really, the energy consumption. So kind of going to your question earlier, Director Barnett, was, we use natural gas to cook. We use natural gas to create steam for our sterilizers and humidity because we're in a low humidity environment. We use it to heat the hospital. Even in the summer, we still have to heat the hospital, as well as all our domestic hot water. So we use natural gas in a lot of ways. And really in this reuse component, it's how can we capture as much thermal potential that we've used energy to create to reuse that thermal potential back in our loops. And, the technology that's coming out these days is pretty incredible. How much it escalates. I like to tie it to the MRI. We put a new MRI in, and before we even put it in, there's a newer, better MRI. It feels like we're in that same capacity as this technology is just increasing on an exponential level. So, really looking at opportunities of how we can optimize our efficiency of use, as well as capture as much of that thermal potential, which we do capture a ton of thermal potential. It's not like we're wasting the heat that we have or generate within the hospital, but again, improving on that and bringing down some of those energy components.
Before you go, one of the other things that was interesting is some of these very large facilities in other parts of the country utilizing ground source heat pump systems and what have you. Again, in that environment, very easy to do. We're on granite. And so we have different kinds of challenges to utilize some of those things, but I think they're worth looking at. Food was also very interesting. And for those of us that work here at the hospital, if you think bacon was controversial when that went away, there are ways to redesign food and dietary menus that other things would go away. But certainly something we can look at and make improvement with. I was going to be very politically careful.
So kind of the other one is rethink. And again, I think this circulates back really to everything. In the healthcare and hospital environment, every change affects so many different departments, right? And we need to focus on our patient care, our patient safety, our quality, our regulatory requirements, and really it takes a village at the end of the day, even to change something like a suture kit, right? That reverberates throughout the health system. I went to a session on anesthetic gases, which is something we have been working here and looking at, and it's a challenging environment to operate. So, obviously the patient safety and the quality is paramount. But we also use nitrous oxide and other gases in the facility. And I was actually just talking to our an anesthesiologist the other day of, hey, what does it take to get rid of nitrous oxide? And so it's a challenge because we feel like we can do it. From a regulatory perspective, the California Building Code requires you to put pipe nitrous oxide into ORs. It still does right now. Because pipe nitrous oxide has to be in the ORs, we have to maintain and have that system operable. So even, we have to look full circle, and even if we want to make those changes, we still have to do the right thing through the regulators. And I'm not saying that we can't do that in the future, but there are hurdles to get through, and alternate means of compliance or whatever level of investment and effort that looks like, to go against what the regulators are telling us to do. So really just wrapping that up into, it really takes the village here.
Well, and one thing that, Dylan and I discussed, and he didn't mention on the anesthetic gases, this will also require great collaboration with anesthesiologists and how they practice. So there's a lot of education that has to go there, but it's not something that would be coming down from administration because you're impacting their world. So that will require a lot of work there.
Yeah. And then again, supply chain's a big one for us. What type of products are we procuring? How are we procuring those products? What do those purchase contracts look like, et cetera?
Before you leave, transportation we'll be talking about a little bit later, but that's a key component in its support of public and alternative forms of transportation.
Yeah. They also,
just really quickly, because Austin brought it up in terms of incentivizing folks to bike to work. And I'm proud of the fact that we do that here, actually. I mean, we live in such a great biking community. And so actually one of the programs we have here is if you do bike to work, it helps us out too because it removes a car out of this, kind of shortage of parking spaces we have. And so we actually buy lunch for them that day in the cafe. So we see a lot of our employees actually utilize that incentive.
The other great thing about the conference is they did circle a lot into funding mechanisms, right? And how you can leverage funding mechanisms, because many of these changes do take an investment. I'll let Ted speak on that a little bit.
This is just an example of funds that we observed were being utilized in real time today, mostly by large organizations, large systems. IRA funds are Inflation Reduction Act funds. Those have a shelf life. But this is just an example of how they were used and leveraged so that you're not placing 100% of the cost burden on the institution. So it's my belief that there will be son of IRA, there will be other buckets of environmental and stewardship funding opportunities to leverage against. So that goes into the design of the projects that we would pursue. The type of funding we're going to pursue and how we would leverage it to not harm the institution itself.
Yeah. The other interesting one specifically about this IRA funding is a lot of these institutions are public, and most of these are all in the form of tax credits. So these institutions actually can't capitalize on those tax credits. So what they do is they do pass down tax credits to their contractors, right? So essentially you're balancing, just throw a number, $100,000 worth of tax credit. So you get a $100,000 deduction from essentially what you'd pay on that investment. They capitalize on the tax credit, so you get that balance as a way to leverage this funding. But it's not acceptable to every state or entity. So actually Ohio State and the state legislature don't allow those pass-through benefits, so they can't leverage this.
That's different state to state. In addition, before we leave this, one of the things that was discussed in one session was what are called green bonds, or how you utilize bonds for some of what you might endeavor to accomplish. And one of the things that we might look at would be the creation of a green bond policy. So what do we expect from a bonding agent? What do we expect from the institution that extends the bonding? Ooh. The path forward. We're at the first box right now, and rather than belabor this, I think one of the important things, we're defining the starting line. We worked with Mazzetti. We're starting to really take an internal look at what we have and areas that we can improve. The second box is the one that's really interesting, and that is establish a team. It's interesting because almost all, I think every single presenter, and they were mostly larger institutions, systems, not a rural critical access hospital like we are, established a team. And I mean a decently funded team. I think Ohio State had 5 full-time FTEs that work on this, but they're a big system. I think Dylan and I were both in the same place at the end of the conference, that we can accomplish some things with what we have, but it might be in fits and starts. And so at some point, we're probably going to have a very serious conversation about a dedicated FTE that is a champion for these types of things, that comes to work every day, working on these types of projects and funding and what have you. I just wanted to make the point because it was an observation that we had of almost every successful story that was out there by a multitude of institutions. Didn't matter if it was Ohio State, we quote that a lot. It was Stanford, and it was many others. And that's just a thing that we're going to have to think about as we move forward in the future, and we better define things. The other thing I think that's important is when you look at these planning processes, engagement of stakeholders, evaluation and prioritization of actions, whole methodologies of decision-making, such as, what's intermediate, what's midterm opportunities, what are end-of-life opportunities. And that doesn't mean our lives, but I mean buildings, for example. In decarbonization, there was an example where a building that had existing services contained in it, they built a new building over here, which was able to be state-of-the-art, move the services and then go to work on decarbonization of the prior building, and then they can move other services into that. We're not of that magnitude. And so that's a bit of a different challenge for us.
Yeah.
There are ways, but it's a challenge.
Yeah, well said, Ted. The only thing I'd add is, again, it takes a village, and I think somebody to centralize that with and track all the analytical data and circulate with all the department and the end users to areas of impact so we make critical and strategic decisions appropriately is going to be a real need once we develop, the goals, starting line, and our strategy going forward. And with that, happy to open up any discussion or questions.
I've got a question, if I could. Do I assume correctly that in these efforts to clean up our act, in essence, that it'll also result in some cost savings to us as well? Or is there going to be a net cost for doing this work?
I think it really depends, and I think that's definitely part of the strategic alignment of what we're going to tackle is where's that in your area of impact. Mm-hmm. So for sure, by electrifying, becoming more efficient, we're going to save on utility costs. Yeah. What that ROI is, purely dependent on what we have today, what type of efficiency we're going to gain, what that use is going to be. So totally, is there a life cycle cost benefit to some of these strategies? Absolutely. Are there some that are just an initial investment and have no payback? Absolutely. I think we're going to see the full spectrum and really have to analyze strategically where we invest dollars.
And how we leverage them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
You stole my question.
Oh, yeah.
That's it.
Well, the next question is, what kind of pressure is being put onto some of the suppliers if they're packaging things that maybe the packaging isn't quite correct? It's more plastic, or it's more something. Or groups can say, well, you're putting this, that, or the other thing in the package, but nobody ever uses it, or we found out that only 10% of everybody that buys it uses the whole package.
That's a good question. And I think the answer is, for the larger institutions and systems, they've got a very large economic footprint. And so by changing their policies, and that's what this is about, is changing your policies. What are your procurement policies look like? What do you expect from your vendors? I think it's economically easier for them to have more leverage in that than us at our size. However, when we look at things like the LLC, and the other hospitals that we're engaging in ways that can benefit all of the membership, I think we can increase our economic pressure with respect to vendors if we all agree to do the same thing for the same reasons. So I think there are pathways to do those things, and it will start with policy development.
Yeah. And I can give you an example. So I'm not our procurement specialist, so I'm not going to pretend to jump into that realm. But on the construction side of things, we actually have a full interior design book, right? Set of guidelines. And for instance, on our flooring products, we actually require 0 VOC flooring, right? So those are the type of things I think we can do that puts that pressure back on, or at least goes the product direction that we want.
I do think there's a lot of interest here about packaging. Recently I was sitting in a meeting and we were actually going through a little bit of a training on a new point of care test. And the test itself was just this tiny little test, and it was in this huge packaging, right? And I think there was more discussion about the packaging than what the test could do. So there's a lot of interest here, and actually one of the questions that was asked by a provider was, is there anywhere else we could get this test that didn't have so much packaging? And at that time, it was the only FDA-approved test for that, particular test that we were seeking. But, I mean, that's the conversation, right? So if people are asking that question, we can, of course, seek out, are there other opportunities? And I think the industry is going to wisen up on that as larger health systems specifically start to really look at these and put policies in place around packaging.
I just had a question. We've joined a larger group with other hospitals that was somewhat recent. Are any of those hospitals willing to participate with us in some of these types of projects? So we've got a little bigger footprint and maybe a little larger leverage against suppliers and so forth to be more responsible with their packaging, for example.
Yeah, I think you're referring to the Sierra Health Collaborative.
Yes.
And this is a collaboration between, for those of you in the room that are not aware, Barton Health Center, Tahoe Forest, Carson Tahoe, Mammoth, and there's one more, Marshall Medical. And, you know, not something that I've seen or heard them discuss, but we have pretty regular meetings, and I think that's something that I can bring to them in our next meeting.
Great, thanks.
Well, even looking at some of our organizations that we belong to, ACHD, I mean, when we were at their last conference, nobody was talking about it. I don't know if anybody even was thinking about it, let alone talking. So, I mean, that kind of conversation, that kind of conversation can be brought, and the same thing with the California Hospital Association. Seeing, you know, who is doing anything in California, and can we dovetail on some of their information?
Stanford.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, yeah.
Yeah, there's surely some California hospitals that are probably leading the way here. And so, again, another thing that I can bring up to the California Hospital Association and try to get more information and bring back to this group as we kind of continue our journey and awareness. And, you know, as we start to look to future boxes we need to move to, I think more information is the better, right? So.
Mm-hmm.
Anything from our audience about our plan, what we've learned so far?
Well said.
Well, we look forward to hearing more of where we're going to start. We know where our beginning line is, and now where are we going? And so hopefully we'll get some more reports back at some point. I think we're all excited about doing something, especially now that we've experienced so much of our climate change, is if there's anything we can do to help. I mean, we won't see it tomorrow, but certainly down the line for our children and our grandchildren. Thank you again. I think, Ted, you're going to stay up there, because we're going to talk about how we're going to save the environment by funding.
So at the April board meeting, you heard a report from Alfred Knotts, who is the Director of Transportation of the Town of Truckee, about microtransit. And the town embarked on a microtransit experiment in the form of 3 pilots, as you heard. The first pilot was a summertime pilot. It was limited in scope and within the boundaries of the town of Truckee. It didn't go everywhere in the town. We did contribute $30,000 to that effort. The winter of 22-23, they decided to, let's see what the winter months look like, and we stepped up with $40,000 for that. This past year, they went for a 1-year full pilot, and we contributed $100,000 for that. We were not the only funder. Visit Truckee Tahoe contributed a large sum of money, more than we'd have. The Homeowners Association in Glenshire and Tahoe Donner as well. So there have been other funders. You know, Alfred really shared with us the utilization figures that they have found. And in our area, Gateway, where the hospital is, was some over 17,000 either terminus or launches from our area. The reason we chose to get involved with this, not only is it an innovative idea and it's a good collaborative idea, so even though we were a little bit at loggerheads with the town on some things, we were not on transportation. And after COVID, the pandemic, we had rather robust taxi services. We had 2 or 3 taxi companies here in the area. We had Lyft. We had a contract contracted we had very early on established with Lyft, and we had Uber. So we had many different opportunities for transportation for our patients that do not drive but need to get to appointments, as well as for release of patients that may need transportation. So we were found after the pandemic, found ourselves in a situation where Lyft and Uber went away virtually. They didn't have the penetration to perform the services. There was one taxi service left, and the owner was the driver because he was not able to field staff. And actually, he ended up closing down because it just wasn't a viable business. So this actually provided a really great service for us. Some of our employees that live within the Truckee boundaries could use it for transportation, which takes cars out of our parking lot. We also know that patients that either cannot drive or do not drive, particularly elderly in the winter months, what have you, were utilizing it. And that's important, particularly with some of our senior patients on reimbursement where they may have a preliminary visit and a required follow-up. And, that can hurt us if they don't make their follow-up. So we've been able to use it for that. I just wanted to read from a little message I got from Jan Aida, our Chief Nursing Officer, that she fully supports our support for TART Connect. In nursing, we depend on this service to have rides for our patients for discharge from ED, hospital, or to return for appointments and services. Without this service, our case management department will pay for rides with Lyft or limited taxi service, which are extremely costly, to ensure that these patients can get home or to their appointments. So the status is that the town wants to continue it without break for another year, and they're looking to replace the vendor and purchase, in fact, I believe they've already made the motion to purchase their own vehicles. So they're going to create some efficiencies. I think some of them will be EVs, and operate the system in-house. It's important also because they built up a constituency, and you don't want to build up a constituency and then drop it, still pursue it, and then bring it back. You're gonna lose in that situation. The town on Tuesday night did vote to put on the ballot a half-cent sales tax increase in the town of Truckee, and part of that is targeted at funding TART Connect in the Truckee area. So they're looking to make it sustainable and find other methods of funding it rather than their general fund or reliance upon supporters like the hospital. So they're moving in that right direction. They just feel they need this next year to do that and to continue with the program. And so we would step up if it's the board's desire to $150,000. I believe it's an appropriate thing to do, not only for reasons that were outlined in the prior agenda item that you heard, but also to continue to expand the program, better serve our patients, and of course be a collaborator and partner in the community. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any additional questions you might have.
Yeah, a question, Ted. This money is going to be like a one-time thing, so they'll have other funding sources, and what we're trying to do is just get them through the next year. Is that the idea?
That's correct. The other funding partners are going to be stepping up as well. In fact, VTT, Visit Truckee Tahoe, is stepping up even more. It's a very big number. I can't recall, but it's close to $500,000. So yeah, it's a one-time thing to keep the thing going and continue it without a break while the town works to find sustainability. The other thing, I think I want to paint a big picture. We know that in our district there's a TART Connect program in Placer County, and we've got this one in Truckee. They don't meet in the middle. The great challenge of transportation in our region is we have two counties and a city, all with different methodologies, rules, and policies. It's hard to get them all to dovetail. I think that the ultimate goal in the future would be to expand TART Connect on this side, so it's in the unincorporated part of Nevada County, and then eventually be able to marry up with Placer County. With the technology that we have today, we can true up on a quarterly basis, for example, how many miles a Truckee TART Connect traveled in Placer County and vice versa, and true up by accounting. So I think that's the ultimate goal one day, is to have this service be available seamlessly in the region.
So have the other partners in TART Connect, like Tahoe Donner and Glenshire, are they also increasing their contributions?
My understanding is yes. Well, definitely with VTT, absolutely.
Okay.
Ted, it seems like this is a no-brainer for us because, as you say, it brings patients to us here who might otherwise not have be able to make their commitment to attend their scheduled appointment. And it frees up parking spaces, since we still are unable to build that parking lot that we need so badly. So it seems like it's a win-win for us.
It is. I would also like to point out that it is in the budget that you approved this afternoon.
That was my next question.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and patients and employees. We see employees get dropped off all the time, picked up all the time, and so.
I'm not going to name names, but I have a number of friends that have utilized the service on their way home from an evening out.
Why would that be?
They lost their keys. I don't know what the case, I don't know what it would have been. But no, I mean, there are so many benefits to this program, I think, that dovetail into public health and benefit to the community.
Yeah, I mean, just in terms of health and safety, surely the TARP program does keep intoxicated drivers off the road. And I think, as a health system, that's important to us as well, so.
Or drivers that lost their keys.
Or drivers that lost their keys.
I think we all have stories of, I don't know, all of us, but riding TART, just from the air show this past weekend. I went with my husband so we wouldn't have to drive 2 cars, but I was helping out. So I said, I'll just take TART Connect to come back. So I called them, and I got to meet new friends. I have new friends that I can recognize out on the street now because we all rode TART together, all talking about why we were using TART. And I thought it was a great opportunity, number one, to say, Tahoe Forest helped support this, as well as just like knowing that she has a ride home tonight when she gets off of work, who this other woman was in the car with me. So I am a great supporter of it as well. Sometimes you have to be patient because they can't just turn around. There aren't that many vehicles. I think they had 7 to begin with that they were using, and they say 15, but I would count on 20 to 25 sometimes, especially during the day hours.
Just to follow up that comment, since I live in Olympic Valley and we have a similar service there to get people to the ski area, it's worked really well there, and it's expanded to Alpine Meadows, and now it's expanding into Tahoe City, so that it's an increasing go-to development in regional transportation, as Ted points out, and hopefully some days these systems get connected. But for environmental reasons, for safety reasons, for being able to assure people transportation, I just think it's the system that has worked the best in these communities, and I'm happy to support it.
Any comments from our audience? Yes.
Hi, I'm Megan Shirley. I'm a physician assistant for the hospital. I live in Alpine Meadows. We're neighbors, kind of. And I was just curious, Ted, the Placer County North Tahoe TART Connect program, have we looked into the ridership there? Like how many patients are taking it to the Tahoe City Clinic, lab, or physical therapy? And has the organization considered supporting them as well, as since they're part of the district? Or how does Placer County feel about that?
That is a good question. I don't have the answers, but I'll check into that and be happy to look into that, because I think you're probably right, and we have a duty to do that because it's also in our healthcare district.
Yeah,
so.
I have a lot of patients who live down the West Shore in Tahoma, and it's a long drive, and they don't always have transportation, and that's definitely a barrier to care. So
That's right. And right now, what the difficulty is they can leave from Tahoma, they have to go to Olympic Valley, or they have to go to North Star to get on a TART bus to
Right.
come to Tahoe Forest and then play that game again. And the goal is eventually to erase that difficulty. I'll check into that. Thank you.
thanks.
Thanks for that question. If there's no other audience input, then can I have a motion to approve committing $150,000 for fiscal year 2025 to participate in TART Connect, Town of Truckee's Regional On-Demand Transportation Program?
I will so move that we dedicate $150,000 for the TART Connect program.
Could I have a second?
I'll second.
So it's been moved and seconded to support the
Got me worried.
TART Connect with $150,000 from Tahoe Forest for fiscal year 2025. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? So you can
Thank you
go
very much.
forward to town and let them know. Thank you. Our next point is 14.2, and this is the first reading of our proposed revision to the Tahoe Forest Hospital Board of Directors bylaws. As you know, every 2 years, we are reviewing our bylaws and making any additions or corrections to them as necessary. And with this past governance meeting, we reviewed them. There were some editorial changes, capitalizing words, making grammar correct, but more importantly, we took away under, I think it was committees, where we annually affirmed our board committees by resolution. We just deleted that sentence and said that we'll annually reaffirm, rather than the antiquated way would be to do it through resolution. And those are the changes we had. We have, legal counsel has reviewed them as well, and by bylaws, we do a first reading, which would be this month, and then next month we would vote on them. And if there's any further changes, then those would have to be added and then reviewed again. So do we need an action for that? Just,
Yeah, I would recommend a motion to introduce, so that we have that on the record for next
okay,
time.
then, could I have a motion to do the first reading of the proposed revisions to the Tahoe Forest Board of Directors bylaws as of June 27th, 2024?
So moved. Dale?
Okay. Could I have a second, please?
I'll second it.
Okay. So it's been moved and seconded to approve the first reading of the proposed revisions to the Tahoe Forest Hospital Board of Directors bylaws, and the second reading to be done at our July meeting. All in favor?
Public comment on the
Oh,
item?
sorry. Have you read our bylaws? Would you like to make a comment?
Real exciting reading.
Hearing none.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
So since there aren't any, did I take the vote?
No.
Okay. So all in favor of the first reading being done today?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? So you'll see this again on our agenda next month. Okay, 14.3 is approval of the amendment number 1 to acting CEO employment agreement. And we had an acting CEO because we had a CEO on an administrative leave. Our CEO has departed, and now we have to move into an interim CEO. And the recommendation from the board has been to use the same contract and change it to interim for our acting CEO, Louis Ward, to move into the interim. So do I have any discussion by the board?
I think it's just a legal requirement. They just have two different names for the same thing, so I just think we need to name it correctly here, and that's what this does, so I'm in favor of it.
And we do have to have the interim CEO signing all of our certifications and all our legal documents that keep us as a district. And we need to have an interim for that. And so that's why we're moving on to having our acting move into the interim. Do you have any comments from our audience? Okay. Then can I have a motion to approve the amendment number 1 to the employment agreement from acting to interim for Louis Ward?
I'll move at this time that the employment agreement with amendment number 1 be ratified.
A second?
So moved.
Okay, so it's moved and seconded to
So seconded.
approve the amendment number 1 to the employment agreement from acting to interim for Louis Ward. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, so we'll be signing those papers. So Louis, They're the interim. 14.4 is Whitkeefer's letter of agreement for recruitment of a new president and CEO. And hopefully we have Mark Andrews from Whitkeefer, who's going to talk to us a little bit more about the process that we're signing this letter of agreement for. He's also going to tell us about the two different departments within Whitkeefer that we're going to be working with. So, Mark?
Thanks, Alice. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to talk a little more about the process, answer any questions you might have. Essentially, I think we've talked around with Alice and others a little bit about kind of a process that will involve a couple of internal candidates. And, we can take a couple of different approaches, and ultimately we'll seek your direction on that. Ultimately, are we going to simply evaluate, assess the two internals, and then make a decision whether to go to search or initiate a full search, national search, and include the internal candidates in that process and vet them like we would external candidates? And that process, when the healthcare executive search team, which is myself and typically a couple of other people will join me as part of our team, but then our leadership advisory folks who do the leadership assessments, psychometric testing, personality testing, a battery of tests that they put candidates through. Typically, if we're doing a full search, that happens when we're down to finalist candidates. When we're down to the top 2 or 3 candidates, they will put them through that battery of assessments and then report back to the board the findings or the results of those assessments. If, on the other hand, you decide that you want to engage the leadership advisory team earlier and just assess the internal candidates, we would engage them sooner in the process. And either way, what we'd do to start the process would be to meet with the board, to do intake sessions, to listen, to get our heads around what's going to be important, regardless of whether it's an internal or external candidate, what the board's looking for in terms of what the state of the union is today, what the current state is, and what the future state of the organization is, and who's going to be the right kind of candidate to get us from current state to future state. We'll synthesize that into a document that becomes the leadership profile. And then if we're assessing just the internals only, we'll assess them against that document. If we decide to do a full search, national search, and include them, they would be interviewed like any other candidate. We'd assess all candidates against that document that we've developed with the input of the board and other stakeholders there. But that would be sort of the initial step in the process, is come on site, spend a couple of days on site, meeting with key stakeholders, getting the input from board and other stakeholders, and then creating that document that synthesizes everything we heard to make sure that we understand what we're assessing for the next CEO and what we're looking for. So that would be the first step. And the two, divisions are the healthcare search division, which I'm representing, and then our leadership advisory team, which are the people that do the leadership assessments, the onboarding process for the new CEO, et cetera. So that's a little kind of high-level overview of the process, and I'm happy to answer any questions. I know there's probably a lot of questions about sort of process in and of itself and sort of where do we engage different parts of the organization.
Yeah, I have a question, Bob Barnett, Director here. One of the things we want to look at going forward is the form of governance. One of the things that we have been getting some information on is dyadic relationships. And so it would make a difference as to how we do the search depending on what form of governance we use. So one of the things we wanted to look at right away was dyadic relationships, whether they would be appropriate to our size hospital and our organization. And once we decide on the form of government, then I think we can start looking at what sort of candidate searches we would do, probably starting with an internal search, but considering other alternatives as well, because we want the community to feel comfortable that whatever form of governance going forward has been carefully vetted, is appropriate to our community as well as the people that we serve within the hospital. And to that end, there's a lot of people within the hospital that want to have some input on what the form of governance is. We've had medical staff that have come to our board of directors meetings that have views about collaborative relationships going forward, and are very anxious to provide inputs. So we want to make sure that we have an opportunity for everyone within the hospital and within our community to have the ability to be heard about what they are interested in as far as governance is concerned. So that's a primary issue that we really want to consider first before we start looking at who might be the appropriate candidate. So I wanted to share that with you, find out what part of your group could assist us with that task.
Well, I think kind of both components would probably assist you with that task. I think what we can do is provide insights. We're not going to give you the answer. Ultimately, we can provide advice and counsel and look at other models where that dyadic leadership structure is in place. And then ultimately the board has to decide, is that the model we want to pursue? And is it appropriate for our organization? I think you're right. That is the first decision point for the organization, is are we going to pursue that model of leadership? And then that ultimately will dictate sort of how we go to the market, if we go to the market. But I think I've shared with Alice and others on the leadership team that what you're looking at is sort of a co-CEO model, and there's very few organizations in the country that utilize that model. The dyad leadership structure often is implemented in organizations sort of at the next level down. The organization that people look to as a model, that's one of the first organizations to do it and does it extensively across their organization, is the Mayo Clinic, as a physician-led organization, and they've got a dyad model throughout the organization. And in fact, the CEO of that organization as a physician has a dyad partner, which is called the Chief Administrative Officer. She actually reports to the CEO. Although she's called his dyad, she reports to the CEO, and then at other levels of the organization, they'll have a physician and an administrative lead over various departments, over various service lines. But at Mayo Clinic, the CEO has ultimate authority and responsibility for the organization. We've not seen that model at the CEO level very effectively work in other organizations because of kind of some of the confusion it tends to create. Where you see it is as a transitional model when organizations merge. There's examples of that when large health systems come together. Politically, they'll appoint CEOs from both institutions to function as co-CEOs, but it's usually for a limited period of time, typically 12 months, maybe on the outside 2 years. But it has a defined period of time, and then one of the CEO is designated to become the CEO of the organization. And so it's sort of a limited period of time. It's not common to see it where you decide to change your structure and put a dyadic leadership model or a co-CEO model in place. I will tell you, I reached out to my shareholder partners around the company, and we've got over 35 shareholders that work with health systems around the country for a model, an example of places where it's worked. And we came up with one that is effectively working, and it's at Cooper University Health System in New Jersey, where they do, for the last 5 years, it's going on its 5th year, where they've got a dyadic leadership structure, co-CEO. They actually call it a co-CEO model. One of them happens to be a physician, and one is an administrator. He's actually an attorney. That both were in the organization. The physician had been in the organization for about 20 years, did his residency there and grew up in the organization, became the chief medical officer and the chief physician executive. And then the attorney had been there about 7 years when they created the co-CEO model. when the CEO retired from that organization. That's an example where it's working, and as I understand it, it's working effectively. But there aren't many examples where it is, and we could certainly, if you ultimately decide that's the model, I think you still need to do an assessment of the internal candidates, put them through the leadership assessment, and ultimately assess them against the criteria that you've determined you're looking for, and then decide if, they are the right people to lead the organization into the future together. I've always said, if you looked at a model like Mayo and decide we want to be a physician-led organization, then my advice is saying, let's look for a physician leader for the organization. And then create a dyad model like Mayo does, where you've got a physician CEO and you've got a chief operating officer, chief administrative officer, that's the dyad, but historically they report up to the CEO, who also has ultimate decision-making authority and responsibility for the direction of the organization. But, we will provide some counsel and do some discussion with the organization, but ultimately the board has to decide if that's the governance model we want to pursue. I'd say if you're going to go to the market and say, let's go to the market, identify candidates, and we go to the market and say, we're hiring for an organization in Northern California that's hiring for a co-CEO, and we want you to be considered as one of the candidates for a co-CEO model, we'll have a hard time generating interest from external candidates to step into a CEO role that's a co-CEO model. Typically where you see it is people that are already inside the organization. I think like you're considering that you'd move into that structure. But if we went to the marketplace and said that's what we're recruiting into, we'd have a hard time generating interest from the top tier candidates.
I think that's useful commentary. Second question, we want to make sure that whoever has a strong interest in the governance going forward has some forum in which they can voice their interest and concerns. Is there a way to do that?
Where you ask the candidates whether they...
No, not candidates. I mean, there are people in our community, there's people on the medical staff who want to be heard about the form of governance. And is there a format where we could have an opportunity for them to give their inputs?
Yeah, I think we create that where, like we do in any intake session, where we sit down with key stakeholders, including medical staff leadership, and listen to what they have, what their input is, and why they think that is the model that the organization, if in fact that's their bias, is listen to the values and the reasons that they feel like that's important, and then synthesize that, come back and share our thoughts with the board about the pluses and minuses, and ultimately give them a voice to talk about it, and also we'll challenge, we'll push back and talk about what we see as the positives, where we see as challenges with the model, and where organizations have run into problems with that model. But ultimately, you create that opportunity. We could do that to sit down with those folks and whoever that might be, and typically it's the medical staff that are the ones that are opining for sort of the dyad model, and that's great. We'll be happy to sort of sit down and dialogue and discuss that with them, and not come into it with a preconceived notion or a bias. We don't think you should do it. We'll simply talk about the pros and cons of each and try to identify organizations, and maybe even provide some examples or some places that the board may want to sort of reach out to and talk to Cooper University Health System or other places where they've tried the dyad model and it's either worked or hasn't worked, and what some of those experiences were. And I think hearing it from people that have pursued that governance structure would probably be helpful. But we'd be happy to provide the sort of forums for the various stakeholders to provide input to what that structure looks like.
Thank you. That answers that question. I have a third question, and that is to do what we're talking about here, where we talk about the governments and we have some stakeholder input, and then the board will have to make a decision as to what we're going to have, whether it'll be a single CEO or whether we're going to do something else. In looking at your contract and letter agreement, would that be included within the letter agreement that you proposed that's dated June 12th?
I'm sorry, what be included? Is creating the forums for input?
Well, not only the forms for input, but the meeting and discussion of the form of government. In other words, we want to consider dyadic relationships and get the pros and cons on that and try to make the best decision for the form of governance going forward. So is that included within your contract, that discussion with the board?
Well, typically, our contract is for going to the market and doing the search. Or one of the things we talked about, I think I talked about it with Alex, and I don't know if Alice, you were part of that discussion, is what we would do is we could do the intake meetings and include those forums for folks to provide their input. And then and we'd only charge sort of the first invoice, if you will. First invoice, so 1/3 of the overall fee. And we'd build into the assessment process. And then if the board decides we want to do the dyadic leadership model and end up, let's say, promote our 2 internal candidates, we wouldn't do the search. You'd only pay that amount that you've paid. If you decide to go to the marketplace, do a full search, we'd apply anything you've paid already to the overall fee. So you would just apply what's already been paid, and that would we just continue the search. So you wouldn't have added on. But if you say we just want to do the assessment and then decide what we're going to do, then we'd have to figure out from our leadership advisory team, sort of build an engagement just to do that sort of leadership assessment or the community input and leadership or stakeholder input, and then decide at that point if you're going to do a search. That might be a separate engagement. We'd have to figure out how you'd want to structure that and what the outcomes are for that you'd ultimately want to get to.
Well, in order to assess that, would it be possible for you to meet with the board so we can have the full board discuss with you the best way to proceed going forward? And then if you need some supplement to your contract, you could do that?
Yeah, we can do that. Okay. Absolutely. I wouldn't propose doing it. I'd say let's have that discussion before we ever sort of decide sort of a separate engagement for that. Let's figure that out. And then if we need to do a supplement of some sort, we could talk about that, what that might look like.
Okay, great. Because I think it would be important to meet with the board, and then you'll have a better feel for what our issues and concerns are, and that will help you better understand whether your current engagement letter covers it all or whether you need something more.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that would be a good discussion to have to figure out kind of how we proceed.
Okay, thanks so much. You've answered my questions.
So do you have any other questions? Mark,
Yeah.
you were talking, okay, go ahead.
I just, for clarification, we've had 2 internal candidates that have expressed interest, but if we were going to effectively do an internal search, would you be recommending it be effectively an open application for others?
Typically not. If you're going to assess the internal candidates, let's just focus on the internal candidates, assess them, opine, provide feedback, and then ultimately decide at that point, are we going to pursue that model and pursue these candidates as our dyad leadership structure, co-CEOs, or are we going to decide to go to the market at that point? But I would say just that first part of the engagement would be just to assess those internals if that's what you're trying to figure out. I wouldn't say include external applicants at that point, because that's going to ultimately turn into a full-blown search.
I'm saying there's potential, there might be more than 2, there might be other internal candidates that would be interested that haven't expressed interest yet.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, there may be other internals, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, if there's other internals that decide to throw their hat in the ring, and we'll assess internals and then decide, have the board decide if how we feel about the candidates we've got as internals, or do we need to go to the marketplace and compare and contrast and ensure that, in fact, these are the right people.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'm going to try this one more time. Mark, can you tell us a little bit more about the stakeholders and how you're going to organize input from them, and how many groups do you usually look at? We've already talked a bit about the physicians, but the other employees, we already know the board is going to have part of the stakeholder group.
Yeah, typically the typical stakeholder groups will include the board, and whether we do that as a group or, one-on-one meetings, it's your call on that. So we'll do the board, typically, when we do medical staff, it's typically medical staff leadership, who's the elected body by their peers. So we'll sit down as a group with the medical staff leadership and, spend an hour and a half talking it through, providing their input. If they need more time, we'll certainly do that. But that's the stakeholder group, and then we meet with the executive team. If you want others, you want to create a forum for others in the organization to sort of provide input, or you can either do that through actually identifying people to meet in a conference room and provide input, or sometimes organizations will choose to do a survey. We'll send out a survey to the organization and ask for their thoughts on what's going to be critical, not who they're not telling the board who they think they should hire, but simply what are the characteristics, what are the important things that the board should consider. You can survey the entire organization through what's like a Survey Monkey tool that we've used to have folks provide input, and then you take the themes from that, and that allows the other folks within the organization. That can get pretty complicated and can get kind of extensive in terms of that, and then how do you synthesize all that into sort of kind of feedback that the board can digest. But typically you'll come out of that with themes that the organization will have, and that's one vehicle we've used to do that. I've met in a big conference room and invited people who wanted to have input and talked it through and provided a forum for an hour for people to provide input and ask about process, how we do our work, and kind of so they understand what goes into a CEO search. Those are forums we've done as well. So we can think that through with you and figure out how many people you want to have involved, what kind of stakeholder groups, but clearly it needs to be the board, medical staff leadership, and executive team. And sometimes the foundation, you might have a foundation board representative or a couple of foundation board members that might want input as well.
Any other questions from our board? Any questions from our audience?
My name is Judy Newland, and I'm a community member, and I really wasn't expecting to speak this evening, but I'm a little confused by what occurred at the June 7th special meeting. June 6th special meeting, where I thought, based on, and this is, by the way, this is not a reflection of any of the internal candidates. So what I think I heard was that what I thought I heard in June was, following the hospital policy on succession planning, was working with the board, the chief of HR, and getting a search firm to look at the best candidates. It doesn't, the policy I don't think specifies internal or external, but most certainly what I heard from the board in June was doing a search and looking at other opportunities besides internal candidates, which, by the way, I'm very respectful of the internal candidates. So I guess I'm just a little confused, because what I heard then is very different what I'm hearing today, and giving direction to your search firm that if you all decide that only the internal candidates are necessary, that will be where you move forward. And is that what I'm hearing you say? That's my question.
Could you repeat the question?
What I heard this gentleman say was that if you all chose to only go with internal candidates, then there will not be any external search. And I heard something different at the beginning of June, and I thought the policy sort of directed you differently. So am I hearing correctly that you may only do internal candidates? Based on what the gentleman said.
That's one possibility. If, once the profile is developed, They will look at the internal candidates against the profile. They will give us that information, and then from that, we can move into a market search for it. Again, we don't know what the profile is yet. We don't know if our candidates internally are 2 or 4 or 6, but we will look at all of them to see if they meet what the profile is. If we find that internally we've got it, we may still go and do an external to really prove and make it defensible that we have picked the right candidate.
I just asked the board to go back to your policy on succession planning and follow the policy. I mean, so just please make sure and I think probably all the staff here would also say that the reasons there's policies is you follow policy. And I do read now that it's not exactly clear, but please make sure you just follow the policy, because otherwise, then why have policies, right? So, okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from the audience?
As you know, Crystal Felix, I'm speaking on behalf of being a community member right now, not as your CFO. And I truly believe the community, the patients, the staff, the physicians, and everybody that sits in administration as well as the board, I think we owe it to our community and our patients to consider all candidates that are available to us. The United States is a very large piece of land with a lot of hospitals on it, and there's a lot of talent out there as well as internally. And I would hate to be short-sighted and not look external as well as internal to the possibilities we could bring for our community, our patients, and for our staff. So I would ask that you consider broadening your horizons a little bit here, and not only considering anybody internal who has an interest, but externally as well. I think it's important. Thank you.
Okay, so we've heard it, that you want an external. I think we're in agreement with that to some extent, in terms of let's do it step by step and then go into the market. Isn't that what we were sort of been talking about, Mark?
I think so. I thought there might be a path where we're just assessing the internal candidates to determine if, in fact, they're the right folks to lead the organization in this dyad model, or if there's more than 2, assess all the internal candidates before the decision is made to go to market. But I may not be understanding that correctly, but what typically happens is, in a normal search, you include the internal candidates, you interview them, put them through the same process as you would an external candidate, and interview them as you would an external candidate, and ultimately decide if they bring more to the table than any external candidate does. That's very typical. About 70% of the searches we do, of all searches, not just CEO, but all searches we do, have an internal candidate. So it's not uncommon to have an internal candidate as part of the process, but it sounded like there's a consideration being given to only assessing internal candidates before we make any decision about whether or not we're going to go to market.
Mark, Dale Chamblin. What I see is that could possibly happen is if you do your thorough evaluation of our internal candidates, and then you look at the available opportunities for others to fill this position and come to us and say, we don't have anybody that is as qualified as the 2 people that you have already in those positions. So obviously that could change our assessment and our board vote on who we proceed with.
Completely agree, but that's as a result of going to the marketplace and identifying candidates. And then I would be surprised if we came back to you and said, we don't have anybody that's as qualified. I just think that we'll identify talented people. And in the end, it's the board's decision if you feel like they bring more to the table than the internals. And I can't assess the internals. Sounds like there's a lot of support for the internals, which is great. And I've completed search. You may know an organization, John Muir Help. We did the CEO search there, and the internal candidate emerged as the candidate of choice. But the board ended up with 3 finalists. One was internal and 2 were external. In the end, they felt the internal candidate was the best choice. And, that's not uncommon to get to that point. But it's hard for me to ever say, I'm going to come back to you and say, there's nobody in the marketplace that's as good as the 2 people you got or 3 people inside the organization. But we want to give you good options to consider and compare them against. And ultimately, it's your decision if you feel like those folks bring more to the table than your internal candidates.
Mark, this is Bob Barnett again. I think we want to do this in steps. We want to make sure that, we decide on the form of government. And then the second step is to assess internal and external candidates so that at the end of the day, we look at all the best choices nationwide, as has been suggested, and then see what we've got and make a decision about who we think is best among all the possible candidates. So at the end of the day, once that selection has been made, we know we've got the best in the country, and that's what we want.
Yeah, exactly right. So I think we have an understanding, and please help me, that we do want to look at our form of leadership, that we do want to look at both internal candidates, but also that we have to go to the market to see if we can get the best. So that would be an external survey as well.
Agreed.
That's fine.
So is that what the...
Yeah, I think that we owe it to our community and we owe it to everyone in this organization to assess all the potential candidates, both internal and available outside, external in the country, so that we can make the best choice possible for the leadership assessment and profile that we develop. But it's got to be done in stages. I think first step, what's the governance going to look like? Second, what's the profile going to look like? And then we can start looking at candidates, internal and external. I think that's the process. And I think the first step on that is Mark, for you to meet with us, with the board as a whole, because, we get along and we can talk as a whole. And I think that'll give you a good feel for, what we're trying to understand in terms of our decision-making.
Agree. Yeah, no, I completely agree with that approach. I guess I was hearing earlier that we not only meet with the board, but we allow community and physicians to have input into what that governance structure looks like.
Yes, certainly. I'm just saying, first meeting with the board so you get a sense of what we're trying to do, and then from there you can kind of put the program together so that we do hear from everybody, that all the important stakeholders and virtually anybody who really thinks it's important and has something useful to say on the subject.
Yeah, more input is better.
Agreed.
Right.
Okay.
Is it still public comment?
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's been a very interesting discussion this evening, but one stakeholder, and I heard the gentleman mention it, but we haven't talked about it explicitly, is that we are a district that is responsible to the voters, the people that pay the property tax that initially started us. So when we talk about community, before we make sweeping changes, I would suggest that the board has to consider a very robust process that involves the stakeholders of the community. We've been talking about internal stakeholders, but I just want to raise the issue. We had members of the public that were here last time. I just cautioned the board, without involving them, you'll fill this board chamber up quite a bit. So we do need to include them in this type of discussion. And Director Barnett, we are meeting with the gentleman right now and the board, so future meetings, of course, would be a public meeting, correct?
Yeah.
That's what you're driving at.
Yeah,
Okay.
no, I think there has to be a public process, and I think the public has to be included as well. I mean, they're certainly an important stakeholder.
Absolutely, they are. Thank you.
Thanks, Ted.
And Ted, I really appreciate the comment, and I think more than what the community might be looking for in leadership is what are they looking for in their health system, right? And depending on what their needs and asks are for the health system, that would help guide the type of leader that we would need.
And I think it's important for Mark to know both what community members want, internally, what medical staff wants, what's important to the rank and file, so to speak. So once you see all of that, it'll help better form the profile of leadership going forward, and then from there we can do our search.
I think too, we have to be really mindful of when public gives comment, because not all public knows the health system or what kind of leadership they want. They just know they want to have good health care. So again, I think when we're talking about the public, we might want to be selective of people that we know that know the health system. I don't know if we would want to have a board meeting, with people coming and they all give input, no matter who they are, because that's what they understand as public, is them. And so we could do a variety of things to get input from the public. And are you willing to do that with us, Mark?
Sure, absolutely happy to do it. The challenge is sometimes you're going to get conflicting input, and then how do you resolve and reconcile that? But that's for the board to digest all of that input and then ultimately make a decision. And I think your community elected you to your position, so ultimately you have that authority to digest all that input and then decide sort of what's key, kind of going to the marketplace or in evaluating candidates, what we're going to be really looking for.
Okay. So are we ready, board, to do a vote of approval of the letter of agreement with Kiefer? Now, understanding what Mark said, what Kiefer will be doing with us?
Yeah, I'm ready. At this time, I would move for approval of signature to the letter agreement with Whit Kiefer.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Can I have a second to the motion to approve the letter of agreement with Whit Kiefer regarding the recruitment of a new president and CEO?
I'll second.
So it's moved and been second. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Then, Mark, you've got your working papers.
Okay, very good. We look forward to working with you.
Yeah, look
Okay.
forward to meeting with you, Mark.
Yeah, we'll get that coordinated. I'll coordinate with Alex and we'll get some time.
I was just going to say, Alex will help coordinate getting this together. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. I'll sign off now.
Yes, thank you for your time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, we didn't pull anything from our consent calendar, so we'll move on to 16. These are board committee reports. Is Mary still on the line?
Yes, I'm here, Alice.
Do you want to give the executive comp committee report?
I believe that that's been tabled until next month.
Okay. The governance committee met this month, and we went through the bylaws, which you got the first reading on. We reviewed and revised the on-board policy for new directors. We have a draft that's being worked on for the board culture and norms, and I think we've retired order and decorum from a board position. And then educational sessions, and this is something that we had talked about at our retreat, to have an annual educational plan. And what we've been thinking about is, because we don't know what's coming up each quarter, that we might just do it 3 months at a time. So today we had the green gas emission and your educational project was the article by the American Heart Association on green gas and sustainability. So as we have meetings with content, what we're going to do is have a reading that goes along with it, maybe a video for some people, readings for others, to supplement those discussions that we'll be having. We also went through the board self-assessment. We deleted one question that was a director's knowledge of another director being prepared. So we felt that that was not really appropriate, so we deleted that, and that was added without the board agreeing on that. And the last thing we did with the board self-assessment was we put back the neutral. It's a 5 level Likert scale, and it's easier to figure out where people are on the Likert score if we have 5 levels. And so we put the neutral, which is a 3, so that we'll be able to compare from year to year to year if we don't ever change it again. So that was what the governance board did, and we will be sending out our work plan to all the committees. And the work plan comes from the retreat we had in April, where we agreed on doing certain things. And to hold us accountable for it, Martina has developed a dashboard that we will be looking at on a regular basis to assure that the board is getting the work done that they've agreed to do. So that's my report. Any foundation reports?
Yesterday, Alice and I both attended the donor appreciation event. Brian and Louis were also there. It was quite an affair. It was well attended. I would say there were 100 people there, perhaps. A lot of conversation and a lot of appreciation for the work that foundation does. And believe me, they do a lot of really, really good work, as we all well know. So anyway, it was fun to attend and chat with these people. And there was a lot of questions asked of me. I don't know about Alice, but asked of me about what's going on with the district board. And I was happy to fill them in to the extent that I could. But got a great event.
And the Truckee or Tahoe Foundation met as well. A couple of big events coming up that are worth putting on everyone's calendar. October, obviously a lot centering around the 75th anniversary. There's 2 events around that are really, it was the balance between having something that was open and inclusive that everyone could attend, and then something that was a little bit more of a fundraiser and might be a smaller audience. So in October, there'll be a big public event. I don't think saying October 6th here. But that would be at, I think it's Truckee, is at the regional park, I think. But
yeah, the regional park.
Yeah, so, barbecues, fun runs, free to everyone to participate, but really a very large public celebration of the 75 years. And then November, I believe, 1st would be a smaller event, a gala, that would be charged, and there was, you have to buy tickets. There was some discussion of, can we get sponsorships? Can we, make it as inclusive as possible? But it really would be, the focus there would be a fundraising event. So almost by definition, you're going to have limited participation. The other big conversation there, clearly the foundation board was interested, as you were saying, about what's going on at the district board, transition in leadership. So there was good discussion around that as well. And I think there was an update on the Gateway project and the Rite Aid project as well. That was it.
A couple other things that have been going on. The Nevada County, as well as Placer County, as well as the town of Truckee, have all done resolutions acknowledging our 75th anniversary. So we'll be having those put up so that everybody gets to see them. But it was really a very nice gesture on all 3 parts in recognizing us. And speaking about our 75th, and Ted might have some more things to add, is that the health system has been identified as the Grand Marshal. And so there'll be a large presence of Tahoe Forest Hospital staff and people marching. So I think he's still looking for people who would like to be in it, and
Almost ready to say no more.
okay, okay. Because he's got to manage all these people, and that
more
could be
the merrier.
difficult. But again, watch for us as we come through Truckee. It should be a really fun event. There will be no throwing of candy or water. So
What time is the parade?
at 10.
10 a.m.
10 o'clock?
Yeah, but the road closes somewhere around 8 o'clock, so you got to get in early. Okay.
Can I just maybe a acknowledgement or thank you? We also had the Hub Day lecture series on May 31st, which I think every board member attended, a number of staff attended. It was a guest speaker talking primarily about AI in medicine, and it was spectacular. Packed room. It was at the Tahoe Event Center down there in Kings Beach. A gorgeous setting. That's where they're proposing the November 75th gala is as well. But just an incredibly valuable experience to have medical staff, community, and then just general hospital staff as well, all sitting around the table talking about a topic that's very relevant, right? How do we leverage technology? How do we all these new and advanced systems? What does it mean to the community? How do we incorporate those? So it's fantastic.
All right. Well, if there are no other comments, then the meeting's adjourned. Thank you.